Nestled between the golden fields of the great savanna and the dense whispering forests stood the village of Ibanu, a land of tradition and old wisdom. Ibanu was a place where every birth was celebrated with song, drumming and dance. The people believed that each new child carried the spirit of their ancestors, a soul reborn to walk the earth once more. The village was made of mud brick huts with thatched roofs arranged in a circle around the great baobab tree, a sacred place where the elders met to discuss the affairs of the people. Smoke from cooking fires mingled with the scent of roasted maize and spiced meat, while the voices of women singing filled the air. Children ran barefoot along the dusty paths, their laughter a melody that blended with the chirping of birds and the distant roar of a river. Life in Ibanu was simple, yet the people knew hardship. They relied on the land for sustenance, and when the rains were plentiful the village thrived, but when the earth was parched, when game became scarce, they turned to the elders and the spirits for guidance. And so it was on one fateful night beneath the eerie glow of a blood-red moon that a child was born, a child who would change the fate of the village forever. Ibanu groaned as another wave of pain tore through her body. Sweat dripped down her brow, her hands gripping the straw mat beneath her as she pushed with all her strength. The women surrounding her murmured words of encouragement, their voices steady and soothing. "Breathe, Ibanu," whispered an older woman, Mama Nala, the village midwife. Her hands, wrinkled and weathered, were steady as she guided the birth. "The child is almost here, one more push." Ibanu clenched her teeth, tears pooling in the corners of her eyes as she gave one final push. A sharp cry pierced the night. The room fell silent for a moment before the midwife lifted the newborn into her arms, his tiny body glistening in the dim firelight. The infant wailed, his voice strong and clear. The women around Ibanu cheered, their voices rising in joyous song. The child had arrived safely, a healthy baby boy. Outside, the men of the village waited, listening intently. When the wailing cry of the newborn reached their ears, they erupted into cheers and claps, but among them stood an old man, his face etched with deep lines, his eyes filled with something other than joy. Baba Odu, the village elder, watched the sky. The moon was red. The wind whispered through the trees, rustling the leaves as though the spirits themselves were stirring. A shiver ran down the elder's spine. He had seen such a moon before long ago, and he knew what it meant. Something was different about this child. Tunde, as the boy was named, grew up like any other child in Ibanu. He ran barefoot through the village, played beneath the great baobab tree, and listened to the stories of the elders. But as the years passed, his mother began to notice strange things. The first sign came when he was barely 5 years old. Ibanu had taken him to the riverbank where she washed clothes while he played in the grass. The village goats were grazing nearby, but one had wandered too close to the rushing waters. Ibanu looked up just in time to see the goat lose its footing, slipping toward the river's edge. "No," she cried, dropping the cloth she was scrubbing, but before she could move, Tunde turned toward the goat and spoke. "Come back," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. To Ibinu's astonishment, the goat stopped struggling. It turned, stepping away from the water's edge as if obeying an unseen force. It trotted back toward the herd unharmed. Ibinu's hands trembled. She stared at her son, who only smiled and continued playing as though nothing had happened. As Tunde grew, more incidents followed. Birds seemed to sing in response to his voice. The village dogs, known for their stubbornness, obeyed his commands without hesitation. Even the cattle, which often required several men to herd, moved at his word alone. People began to whisper. "The spirits have touched him," some said in awe. "Such power is unnatural," others muttered in fear. Baba Odu watched closely. He had seen many things in his long life, but never a child who could speak to the animals as Tunde did. He knew the boy's abilities would either be a great blessing or a terrible curse. One evening, as the sun cast long shadows over the village, Baba Odu called for a gathering. The villagers gathered beneath the baobab tree, murmuring among themselves. The chief of Ibanu, Obadiah, sat in the center, his stern face unreadable. Baba Odu stepped forward. "The child Tunde possesses a gift unlike any we have seen before," he said, his voice carrying the weight of wisdom. "The spirits do not grant such power lightly. We must be careful." Ibanu clutched Tunde close to her, her heart pounding. "He is just a child," she said. "He means no harm." The chief nodded slowly. "Ibanu, we do not doubt your son's heart, but gifts such as his can bring both fortune and misfortune. We must be wise." From the crowd, a young man named Kojo, Obadiah's son, stepped forward. His eyes gleamed with something unreadable. "If he truly has a gift, then let him prove it," Kojo said. "Let him call the animals before us." The villagers murmured in agreement. Ibanu looked at her son uncertain, but Tunde, with the innocence of a child, simply nodded. He turned toward the fields where the village's cattle grazed. The people watched, holding their breath. Tunde closed his eyes and whispered something under his breath. A moment later the cattle lifted their heads slowly. They began to walk forward, moving in unison, stopping just before the gathered villagers. Gasps of astonishment filled the air. Some cheered while others stepped back in fear. Kojo clenched his fists. He had expected failure, not success, and in his heart something dark took root: jealousy. As days passed, the village remained divided. Some believed Tunde was a blessing, others feared what he could become. And in the shadows Kojo whispered into the ears of the villagers, planting seeds of doubt. Did you see how the cattle obeyed him? What else can he control? What if one day he turns against us? The people listened. Fear once small began to grow. And so, though Tunde had done nothing but good, his greatest trial was yet to come. The trial was set for the next day beneath the ancient baobab tree, its gnarled branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. Tunde stood before the assembled villagers, his face pale but resolute, his eyes filled with a quiet dignity. Chief Obadiah presided over the proceedings, his expression grave. Beside him sat Baba Odu, his gaze fixed on Tunde, a mixture of sorrow and concern etched on his weathered face. Kojo stood among the crowd, his eyes gleaming with a dark satisfaction. Tunde, the chief began, his voice echoing through the silence, you stand accused of using your gift for purposes unknown. The disappearance of the child has brought great fear to our village. We must know the truth. I did not take the child, Tunde said, his voice clear and steady. I only want to help find him. Then prove it, Kojo interjected, his voice laced with venom. If your power is truly a gift, use it to find the boy. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Tunde closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind, seeking the whispers of the forest, the rustling of the leaves, the faint echoes of life. But the fear and suspicion of the villagers formed a barrier, a wall of doubt that blocked his senses. He opened his eyes, his heart sinking. I cannot find him. Kojo smirked, or you will not. The crowd erupted in a cacophony of voices, accusations flying, fear turning into anger. Ibanu, her face etched with despair, pushed through the crowd, reaching her son. He is innocent, she cried. You cannot judge him based on fear. Silence, the chief commanded, his voice booming. We must follow the traditions of our ancestors, we must seek the truth. He turned to Baba Odu, elder, what say you? What is the will of the spirits? Baba Odu rose slowly, his old eyes scanning the crowd. The spirits do not speak with words, chief, they speak with signs, with trials that test the heart and spirit. He paused, his gaze resting on Tunde. There is an ancient ritual, a trial of truth that has been passed down through generations. It is a perilous journey, one that will reveal the true nature of Tunde's gift. What trial? The chief asked, his voice filled with apprehension. The trial of the sacred grove, Baba Odu said, his voice echoing through the silence. It is a place where the spirits of the ancestors dwell, a place where only the pure of heart can survive. If Tunde can pass this trial, his innocence will be proven. If he fails. He trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. The chief nodded slowly. Then let it be so. Tunde will face the trial of the sacred grove. The villagers murmured their agreement, their faces a mixture of fear and anticipation. Tunde, his heart pounding, looked at his mother who stood beside him, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and fear. Be strong, my son, she whispered, her voice trembling. The spirits will guide you. The next morning Tunde, accompanied by Baba Odu, set out for the sacred grove, a hidden sanctuary deep within the forest. The villagers watched them go, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and dread. The journey was long and arduous, leading them through dense thickets, across rushing streams, and over treacherous ravines. Baba Odu, despite his age, moved with a surprising agility, guiding Tunde through the labyrinthine paths. As they approached the grove, the air grew thick with a strange energy, a palpable sense of ancient power. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches draped with moss, their leaves shimmering with an otherworldly glow. This is the sacred grove, Baba Odu said, his voice hushed. Here the spirits of our ancestors dwell. You must enter alone, Tunde. You must face the trials that await you. Tunde nodded, his heart pounding. He took a deep breath and stepped into the grove, disappearing into the shadows. The grove was a place of ethereal beauty bathed in a soft golden light that filtered through the leaves. The air was filled with the sound of whispering winds and the faint chirping of unseen creatures. Tunde walked deeper into the grove, his senses heightened, his heart filled with a quiet resolve. Suddenly the ground beneath him trembled and a deep guttural voice echoed through the trees. Who dares to enter the sacred grove? A massive creature emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. It was a guardian of the grove, a spirit of the forest, its form shifting and changing, its presence radiating power. I am Tunde, he said, his voice steady. I have come to face the trial of truth. The creature's eyes narrowed. The trial is not for the faint of heart. You will face your deepest fears, your darkest desires. Only the pure of heart can survive. The creature vanished and the grove transformed, its beauty turning into a nightmarish landscape. The trees twisted and writhed their branches, reaching out like grasping claws. The ground opened up, revealing a chasm of darkness. Tunde's heart pounded, but he did not waver. He remembered his mother's words, the teachings of Baba Odu, the power of kindness and compassion. He faced his fears one by one, confronting the shadows that lurked within his own heart. He saw visions of his village in ruins, his mother in danger, his own power twisted into darkness, but he did not succumb to despair. He held on to the light within him, the belief in the goodness of his gift. He encountered spirits of the ancestors, their forms shimmering and ethereal. They tested him with riddles and trials, questioning his motives, probing his soul. He answered with honesty and humility, his words echoing with sincerity. After what seemed like an eternity, the grove began to transform once more, the darkness receding, the light returning. The massive creature reappeared, its eyes filled with a newfound respect. You have passed the trial, Tunde, it said, its voice echoing with a deep resonance. Your heart is pure, your spirit strong, your gift is a blessing, not a curse. The creature vanished and the grove returned to its ethereal beauty. Tunde emerged from the grove, his face radiant, his heart filled with a sense of peace. Baba Odu waited for him, his eyes filled with a knowing smile. You have proven yourself, Tunde, the spirits have spoken. They returned to the village, where the villagers waited with bated breath. As they approached, Tunde could see the faces of his people etched with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Baba Odu stepped forward, his voice echoing through the silence. The trial is complete. Tunde has proven his innocence, his gift is a blessing, a gift from the spirits. A murmur of relief rippled through the crowd. Ibanu rushed forward, embracing her son, tears of joy streaming down her face. But Kojo stood in the shadows, his face contorted with rage. He had failed, his plan had backfired. Tunde was now hailed as a hero, his power undeniable. That night, as the village celebrated, Kojo slipped away, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. He could not bear to face the shame of his failure, the knowledge that he had been bested by the boy he had tried to destroy. The village of Ibanu had long been a place of unity, where people lived in harmony with the land and each other, but beneath that harmony, hidden within the folds of tradition and fear, resentment festered. Tunde, once a celebrated wonder, was now the subject of whispers and wary glances. Kojo, the chief's son, had done his work well. His words, like the slow drip of poison, had turned admiration into suspicion and suspicion into fear. Tunde did not notice at first. His heart remained pure, his days spent helping his mother Ibanu and tending to the animals of the village, but he could feel it in the eyes of the people, the way they hesitated before speaking to him, the way their smiles never quite reached their eyes. Even Baba Odu, the village elder who had once defended him, now watched him with a cautious gaze. It was Kojo who had planted the first seed of doubt. The spirits do not grant power so freely, he had whispered to the villagers in hushed conversations. What if Tunde's abilities come at a cost? What if the land is suffering because of him? The villagers, already uneasy with the unnaturalness of Tunde's gift, found themselves wondering if Kojo was right. The rains had been unpredictable of late, the game scarce. Some nights the wind carried an eerie howl, a sound that sent shivers down spines. It was easy to blame Tunde. He was different, and different was dangerous. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and bathed the village in hues of amber and crimson, Tunde walked to the river to fetch water. He loved the solitude of the place, the way the wind rustled through the reeds, the chatter of birds overhead. As he knelt to fill his gourd, he heard voices, low, urgent whispers carried by the breeze. He calls the animals, makes them obey. Who's to say he won't turn them against us? I heard from Nia that he spoke to a snake the other day. A snake? The spirits know such creatures are not to be trusted. The crops failed last season. What if this is a punishment for harboring him? Tund clenched his jaw, the water sloshing in his gourd. He turned to face the voices and saw a group of villagers standing in the fading light. When they noticed him, they fell silent, their expressions shifting from fear to guilt. But the damage had been done. The doubt had taken root in their hearts, and Tund could see it plainly in their eyes. He wanted to speak, to remind them of the times he had helped, of the warnings he had given that saved them from storms and sickness, but before he could, the villagers turned and hurried away, leaving him alone with the setting sun and the weight of their unspoken accusations. Kojo, watching from the shadows, smirked. It was working slowly but surely. The village was turning against Tund, but whispers and fear were not enough. He needed something more, something that would push the people to act. That night he approached Baba Odiu's hut, the elder sitting by the fire, his face lined with the weight of years and wisdom. Kojo sat beside him, his voice soft, laced with concern. "Baba," he began, "I fear for the village." Baba Odiu glanced at him, saying nothing, waiting for the young man to continue. "Tund, he is powerful, more powerful than we understand. What if his gift is unnatural? What if we have been blind to the truth?" Baba Odiu sighed, poking at the fire with a stick. "Tund has done nothing but help us. His gifts are rare, yes, but they are not necessarily evil." "But do we know that for certain?" Kojo pressed. "You yourself have taught us that balance must be maintained. No power comes without a price. What if the spirits demand something in return?" Baba Odiu frowned, the firelight casting deep shadows across his face. He had always believed in balance in the ways of the spirits. Had they been too quick to accept Tund's presence? Without question had they ignored the signs? Seeing doubt flicker in the elder's eyes, Kojo knew he had won. He stood, placing a hand on the old man's shoulder. "For the sake of the village, we must be sure." The next morning, as the village gathered beneath the great baobab tree, Baba Odiu stood before them, his expression grave. Tund, summoned from his home, approached with cautious steps, confusion written across his face. "The spirits guide us," Baba Odiu began, his voice steady despite the uncertainty he felt, "and they have always demanded balance. Tund, your gifts are unlike any we have seen. The people are afraid. They question whether your power comes at a cost to the village." Tund's heart pounded. "Baba, I have only ever used my gifts to help. Have I not warned of storms? Have I not brought back lost animals?" Baba Odiu's eyes softened, but he shook his head. "Fear is a powerful thing, my son. We must be sure. We must ask the spirits for a sign." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Kojo stood at the front, arms crossed, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. Tund swallowed hard. He knew the ways of his people. If the spirits were called upon and misfortune followed, it would be seen as a sign of guilt, and Kojo had already ensured that doubt clouded their judgment. That night the village gathered at the sacred grove, a place where the spirits were said to speak through wind and fire. Baba Odiu lit a small flame, chanting ancient words, calling upon the spirits for guidance. "If Tund's gift is a blessing," he intoned, "let the flame burn bright. If it is a curse, let the wind take it from us." The villagers held their breath as the fire flickered. For a moment it burned strong, golden and warm. Tund felt a flicker of hope, but then a gust of wind rushed through the grove, snuffing out the flame in an instant. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Women clutched their children, men exchanged fearful glances. The spirits had spoken. Kojo stepped forward, his voice solemn but triumphant. "The spirits have given their answer." Baba Odiu looked at Tund with sorrow in his eyes. "We cannot ignore their will." Tund's breath came short. "This is wrong," he said, his voice shaking. "The spirits do not work in such simple ways." But fear had already taken hold. The decision had been made. Tund had to go. His mother wept, clutching him tightly before he was led away. "You are not cursed," she whispered. "You are meant for more than this village." Baba Odiu placed a small charm in Tund's hand. "This is not the end of your story." And so, under the watchful eyes of the village, Tund walked away from the only home he had ever known, exiled into the unknown wilderness. Behind him, Kojo watched with a satisfied smile. He had won. Or so he thought. Tund's fate was sealed by fear and betrayal. The whispers that once carried admiration had twisted into demands for his removal. The villagers, blinded by superstition and Kojo's manipulations, saw him as a threat rather than the blessing he had always been. The air in Ibanu grew heavy with uncertainty, and tension crackled like dry leaves beneath the weight of a coming storm. The great baobab tree, once a place of storytelling and unity, now stood as the setting for Tunde's judgment. A crowd had gathered, their voices hushed, but restless Chief Obadiah, his face lined with conflict, sat upon his wooden throne. He had ruled wisely for many years, but now he faced a decision that he knew could change Ibanu forever. Baba Odiyu stepped forward, his walking staff sinking slightly into the dry earth. Tunde, child of the spirits, he said, his voice slow and measured, the people of Ibanu fear what they do not understand. Some call your gift a blessing, others a curse. Tell us now, why should we not send you away? Tunde swallowed the lump in his throat. I have done nothing but help, he said firmly. I have brought food when there was none, saved lost animals and warned of dangers. Why must I be punished for what I cannot control? Kojo, standing beside his father, scoffed. And what if the spirits demand payment for these gifts? What if your powers bring ruin upon us? How long before you decide we are not worthy of your mercy? His words slithered through the crowd, planting seeds of doubt. The murmurs grew louder. Baba Odiyu's wise gaze flickered between Tunde and the crowd. He turned to Obadiah. My chief, the people are afraid. Fear can drive even the kindest heart to cruelty. If we do nothing, the village will turn against him. The chief's shoulders sagged. He looked at his son, at the villagers who once praised Tunde, and at the boy himself. Finally, with a voice heavy with regret, he spoke, Tunde, you must leave Ibanu for your safety and ours. You are exiled. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ibanu, Tunde's mother, fell to her knees. No, you cannot send my son away. He has done nothing wrong, she cried, her voice raw with anguish. But the chief had made his decision. He must leave by sundown. Ibanu wept as she packed a small bundle for her son, dried meat, a water skin and a cloth to protect him from the harsh sun. My son, my precious child, how will you survive out there? She whispered, cradling his face. Tunde held her hands. I will find a way, Mama, the spirits will not abandon me. Baba Odiyu approached, his expression unreadable in his wrinkled hands. He held a small carved talisman. Take this, he said, pressing it into Tunde's palm. It will remind you that you are never truly alone. The spirits walk with you. Tunde looked into the elder's wise eyes, seeing sorrow but also hope. Thank you, Baba. The sun dipped toward the horizon as Tunde stood at the village's edge. The people of Ibanu watched in silence, some filled with guilt, others with lingering fear. He turned to face them one last time, his gaze settling on Kojo. The chief's son did not gloat, but the smug satisfaction in his eyes was unmistakable. Without another word, Tunde stepped into the wilderness, leaving behind the only home he had ever known. The savanna stretched endlessly before him, its golden fields bathed in the dying light. With every step the weight of exile pressed harder on his shoulders. He had no direction, no plan, only the talisman and the words of Baba Odiyu echoing in his mind. Night fell swiftly, bringing an eerie silence. The stars above were unfamiliar, their cold glow offering no comfort. Tunde found shelter beneath a twisted acacia tree, his stomach empty, his heart heavier than ever before. As he drifted into uneasy sleep, whispers stirred in the wind. Do not fear the path ahead, child of the land, the spirits watch over you. Days passed, each one more grueling than the last. Food was scarce, water scarcer. The once familiar calls of birds and rustling of leaves now felt foreign, unwelcoming, but Tunde adapted. He listened to the land, to the whispers carried by the wind, and learned which roots held water, which berries would not harm him. One afternoon exhaustion overtook him. He collapsed near a shallow stream, his breath ragged. Shadows circled nearby, hyenas, their eyes glowing in the fading light. A low growl sent shivers down his spine. Then from the depths of the wilderness a powerful roar split the air, a massive lion, golden as the sun, emerged from the tall grass. The hyenas scattered their hunger, no match for the king of the savannah. The lion locked eyes with Tunde. Something passed between them. And understanding, the beast did not attack, instead it lay down beside the boy, a silent guardian in the dark. Tunde whispered, are you here to guide me? The lion's deep eyes held no answer, only patience. The days turned to weeks. Tunde, once a boy of the village, became a child of the land. He learned from the animals, from the spirits who whispered in his dreams. The lion, whom he named Shango, became his companion, his protector. One night, beneath the light of a full moon, Tunde had a vision. He saw Ibanu, his mother, Baba Odiyu, even Kojo, but the village was not as he had left it. The fields were barren, the people thin and weary. Ibanu is suffering, the spirits whispered. Their greed and fear have turned the land against them. Tunde woke with a start. His exile had been unjust, but he could not ignore the suffering of his people. He had been cast out as a curse, but now he had become something more. I must go back, he murmured to Shango. The lion simply stared as if he had known this all along. Tunde set his sights on Ibanu, his heart steady with resolve. He had left as an outcast, but he would return as something greater. His powers had grown, his bond with the spirits stronger than ever before. The village had cast him away in fear. Now they would see the truth. And so the exile's journey came to an end, not in defeat but in transformation. Tunde was no longer just the boy who spoke to animals. He was a guardian of the land, a spirit's chosen. The time had come to reclaim his destiny. Tunde wandered the vast wilderness alone, but not truly abandoned. The betrayal of his people still weighed on him, yet he refused to let despair consume him. He had always been different, but now he had to embrace it fully. The land stretched endlessly before him, rolling plains, towering mountains, and dense forests shrouded in mist. Here, beyond the reach of Ibanu, he would discover what it truly meant to wield his gift. The first days were the hardest. With no food and no shelter, Tunde struggled to survive. He tried to gather roots and berries, but many were unfamiliar and some left a burning sensation on his tongue. Water was scarce and the heat of the sun beat down on him mercilessly. Yet he was not completely helpless. The whispers of nature surrounded him. The wind carried distant murmurs, the rustling of trees spoke in hushed tones, and the birds above him chattered with knowledge. With time he learned to listen more carefully. One evening, as thirst clawed at his throat, he closed his eyes and reached out with his mind. Somewhere in the vast land water existed. He had done it before in Ibanu, sensing the rain before it arrived, feeling the moisture in the air. Now he focused harder. His body swayed as if drawn by an invisible force, and his feet carried him through the trees until he reached a small spring hidden behind a rocky formation. Clear, cool water gushed from the earth, shimmering under the moonlight. He knelt and drank deeply, feeling life return to his body. For the first time since his exile, he smiled. The wilderness would not break him, it would teach him. As the days turned into weeks, Tunde's connection with nature deepened. He moved through the land like a spirit, no longer fearing its dangers. He slept beneath the ancient trees, listened to the calls of the wind, and ran alongside the rivers. He had become part of the wild. But the greatest test was yet to come. One afternoon, as he roamed the grasslands, he felt a presence watching him. The air was thick with tension. The herds of antelope had gone silent. The birds had ceased their songs. Then he saw it, golden fur rippling under the sun-piercing amber eyes locked onto his. A lion. A magnificent beast larger than any he had ever seen. Muscles coiled beneath its skin as it stalked closer. Tunde's heart pounded. He could not outrun it. He had no weapons to fight it, but he had his gift. He inhaled slowly and reached out with his mind. He did not command, he did not beg, he simply spoke. I mean no harm. The lion stopped. Tunde held his ground, staring into the beast's eyes. He saw more than hunger in them. There was curiosity, intelligence. He did not look away, did not flinch. For what felt like an eternity they stood in silence. Then the lion let out a deep rumbling sound. Not a growl, but something softer. It took a step back. And then another. Tunde exhaled in relief. From that day forward the lion never left his side. He named the beast Shango after the storm god, for his presence was as powerful as thunder. Guided by his newfound instincts and Shango's protection, Tunde ventured deeper into the wild. The world outside Ibanu was vast, filled with secrets hidden in forgotten places. He climbed mountains where the air was thin, crossed rivers teeming with unseen spirits, and wandered through lands untouched by human hands. One night, as he rested beneath an ancient tree, he felt something stir in the air, a presence unlike any he had known. The ground trembled slightly, and the shadows of the branches seemed to shift unnaturally. Then a voice, a whisper carried by the wind. You are not alone. Tunde's breath caught. He turned, but there was no one there, yet he could feel them, the spirits of the land they had been watching. What do you want from me? He asked. The wind rustled through the leaves. What do you want from yourself? Tunde closed his eyes and listened. Visions flooded his mind. Ibanu in chaos, its people suffering, the land barren. He saw his mother's tear-streaked face, Baba Odiu's regret, the villagers' hunger. He saw Kojo standing in the chief's place, his rule cruel and merciless. His home was dying. And then another vision, himself standing tall, radiating power, a protector of the balance between man and nature. His purpose was clear. Tunde opened his eyes, determination burning in his chest. The spirits had spoken, the time had come. Before returning to Ibanu, Tunde had one final lesson to learn. The spirits led him to a sacred grove where an ancient tree stood taller than any he had ever seen. Its bark was smooth and dark, its roots twisted, and deep at its base lay an old man, his skin like cracked earth, his eyes filled with wisdom beyond time. "I have been waiting for you," the old man said. Tunde hesitated. "Who are you?" The old man smiled. "One who has walked the path you now follow. You seek to restore what has been lost, but do you understand the weight of such power?" Tunde swallowed. "I only wish to help." The old man studied him for a long moment, then he extended his hand. "Then take this and let it guide you." In his palm lay a stone, smooth and cold, pulsing with energy. Tunde hesitated before taking it. As soon as his fingers closed around it, he felt a surge of warmth rush through him, filling every fiber of his being. He gasped as understanding flooded his mind. He was not just a boy with a gift. He was part of something much greater. The balance of nature was not to be controlled but protected. He looked up, but the old man was gone. Only the wind remained rustling through the leaves. Tunde knew what he had to do. With Shango by his side and the wisdom of the spirits within him, he turned toward the distant horizon. Ibanu was waiting. And he would return, not as an outcast but as something far greater. The wind carried whispers of change as Tunde stood at the edge of the wilderness. He had left Ibanu a broken boy, cast out by those he once called family. Now he returned as something else entirely, a man who had walked with spirits, tamed the wild, and embraced the gift that had once made him an outcast. Beside him, Shango the mighty lion prowled silently, his golden mane rippling under the morning sun. The weight of destiny pressed against Tunde's chest, but he did not falter. Ibanu needed him. Tunde expected hostility upon his return. He expected fear. He was prepared for the angry shouts of those who had cast him out. But what he found was far worse. Ibanu was dying. The fields, once lush and golden, were barren. The river had receded, its waters barely trickling through cracked earth. The air was thick with hunger, and the people, his people, were gaunt, their eyes sunken with despair. The market, once bustling with traders and laughter, was eerily quiet. Children, once full of mischief, sat listlessly in the shade, their stomachs bloated from starvation. Tunde clenched his fists. This was not the village he had left. He saw familiar faces. Baba Odiyu, the wise elder who had once counseled him, now frail and weak. Auntie Funmi, the woman who had fed him as a child, now too thin to stand for long. And then his mother, her once bright eyes dulled by grief, her back bent with the weight of suffering. Anger burned in Tunde's chest. "This is Kojo's doing," Baba Odiyu rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "Since he took control, the land has turned against us." Kojo. Tunde had known the man was deceitful, but he had not imagined he would bring ruin to an entire village. The spirits had shown him glimpses of this suffering, but to see it firsthand, he would not stand by. Kojo's hut stood at the heart of Ibanu, larger and grander than any other. Where once the chief's home had been a place of leadership, it now reeked of greed. Tunde strode through the village, Shango at his side. The sight of the great lion sent murmurs through the crowd. Some gasped in recognition, others shrank back in fear. Kojo emerged from his hut, flanked by his guards. He was no longer the man Tunde remembered. His face was fuller, his robes finer, yet there was a darkness in his eyes. "Well, well," Kojo sneered, "the outcast returns, come to beg for forgiveness." Tunde met his gaze unshaken. "I come to set things right." Kojo laughed, though there was unease behind it. "And what will you do, boy? Speak to the animals." Tunde did not answer with words. Instead, he raised his hand and reached out, not just to Shango but to the land itself. The wind howled through the village, the trees trembled, the river stirred, its waters bubbling with newfound strength. The people gasped, the earth beneath their feet vibrated with life. Kojo's smile faltered. "This village has suffered under your rule," Tunde said, his voice steady. "The land rejects you, the spirits have judged you." Kojo's guards hesitated, their loyalty wavering. The people of Ibanu, once too afraid to speak, began to murmur. Kojo's power was crumbling. "You are nothing but a cursed child," Kojo spat, his voice desperate, "a demon." Tunde stepped forward. "No," he said calmly, "I am the guardian of this land." With a roar, Shango leaped, his massive form landing inches from Kojo. The man stumbled back, eyes wide with terror. The village watched, waiting for judgment. Tunde did not call for blood. Instead, he turned to the people of Ibanu. "This village belongs to all of us," he said. "It is time we take it back." The villagers, emboldened by his words, surged forward. Kojo's guards stepped aside, unwilling to fight for a man who had brought only suffering. Kojo, seeing his power slip away, turned to run, but the spirits had other plans. A great wind swept through the village, knocking him to his knees. The river surged, its waters rising, surrounding him in a swirling torrent. The very land he had abused now held him prisoner. "This is your punishment," Baba Odiyu said, stepping forward with newfound strength. "You will leave Ibanu and never return." The people murmured in agreement. Kojo pleaded, but the village had spoken. He was cast out just as Tunde had once been. But where Tunde had returned stronger, Kojo would wander alone without the land's blessing. With Kojo gone, Ibanu began to heal. Tunde walked to the river's edge and knelt, placing his hands on the cracked earth. He whispered to the land, to the spirits, asking for their aid. The river swelled, the sky darkened, and then the rains came. The people of Ibanu wept as the drought ended, as the soil drank deeply, as life returned. Tunde had done what he set out to do. But when the village turned to him asking him to lead, he shook his head. "I am not meant to rule," he said. "My path is beyond Ibanu." His mother, though sad, understood. Baba Odiyu nodded in approval. Tunde turned to the horizon, Shango at his side. His journey was not over. There were other lands in need, other people suffering under greed and cruelty. He had been given a gift, not to rule but to protect. And so he walked away into legend. The boy who had once been an outcast became the guardian of the land.